Welcome. Today we're talking about how to transform any culture using this 10-step proven formula. And it's a participatory um, webinar. So please feel free to jump in anytime or to put a message into the chat because one of us will be checking it to make sure that we're interacting with you. And if you have any questions, we invite you to unmute and ask. But today, what we'll be talking about is, regardless of where your culture is at, we'll be talking about kind of what it is, but also how to describe it, protect it, preserve it, and turn it into something that you can be really proud of. Because what we found, Ed and I working together, is that a lot of companies just let their culture happen by accident. But you can make your culture attractive to all stakeholders when you take an active role in developing it. And that's just the thing, is you don't want these things to happen by accident. You want to make sure it's going where you want it to go and that you're the one directing it, not other people in the company, not outside forces. You want to have it under your direction. So who's this webinar for? Well, this is for you if unfortunately your culture is not where you want it to be. And in a lot of cases, that's when people reach out because they're finding that they're getting complaints from their employees. They look at their Glassdoor ratings and it's way down, and they're getting a lot of really bad publicity out there. And it is a big factor in attracting talent. This is for you if there are aspects of your culture that you feel, like it makes you feel like there's people fighting against it. And you want to get people on board. And so we'll be covering how you can address those factors. And then finally, if you want to get your whole team on board with a culture that keeps everyone engaged, happy, and productive, we'll show you some strategies you can use for sure. So please, if you have any concerns immediately, like things you want addressed or you want to bring up, type it into the chat. Maybe, let us know where you're at with your culture. Well, how do you feel like on a scale of 1 to 10? What's your culture like in your organization? Just put it in the chat. We'd love to know and interact and just tailor this to you. It's your webinar. So what are we going to cover? Well, first we'll cover this amorphous blob thing that is a culture, and this is Ed's words. Calls it like an amoeba, and that's the thing is that if you take an amoeba and you put it under a slide, it's just going to spread and go wherever it wants because it has no shape. And that's why we have to contain it. We got to take the culture and define it and make sure it stays in the shape. And then we'll talk about how the key influencers of culture may not be who you thought they were. And a lot of times, when we're talking to organizations, we always end up talking to the people in the positions of key influence, like, they're sitting at the top of the org chart, and they don't always realize that it's not the people at the top of the org chart that are directing where the culture goes. And then finally, we'll talk about how to make difficult decisions when you have players who are not on board. And that's always tough, but a lot of times it needs to be done.
Yep.
And so before we get rolling, next month, so it's our last webinar this year in 2024, it's called Want to Win the War for Talent. Use these metrics to get the intel you need. And we did this one last just because we show all these strategies for how to change culture, how to recruit, how to attract talent, how to market and promote your culture. We want to know how it's working, and metrics and measurements is the way to do that. And so we've picked our favorite ones, and we'll be presenting those on Wednesday, December 11th at 1 p.m. So who are we? Well, I'll just give you a little background. I'm Dr. Paul Newton. I'm a chiropractor by trade, but about 12 years ago, I made a shift from being in practice to being a storyteller. Listened to a lot of people's stories, like thousands of people's stories, got used to listening and interpreting. And so I thought, hey, I want to do this for people professionally instead of just as a medical practitioner, and came across Ed. We worked together on his story, on his for his business, and he thought, hey, this kind of thing works really well for organizations too. So we teamed up. This is what we've been doing since then. I'll hand it over to Ed to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. My name is Ed Crow. I am the talent transformation expert for organizations seeking eight-figure growth. And one of the ways that we drive growth is through transforming the talent pipeline and through transforming the cultures in organizations. And today is one of my more favorite topics that we present because so many organizations, as Paul mentioned, don't manage their culture. And in fact, so many organizations, when I ask them, what is your culture? They can't define it, right? And that's a symptom of a culture that's not being planned out and managed against. And I believe, as does Paul, that managing your culture is a business priority, just like managing sales or production or quality or safety would be, right? We have to really focus on culture in order to make sure it's going where we want it to go. So we're going to hop right in. And as Paul said, we want this to be interactive. So we have more than enough time to answer questions throughout the session, whether that be throwing them in the chat or if you want to unmute. So let's start with this first step in transforming your culture is looking at your business goals, specifically looking at how many business goals you have. And you could, and one footnote I want to make here is that this process we're going to talk about can be used holistically throughout the company, or it could be used very specifically within a division, a department, a work shift, right? So you can think kind of globally or you can think locally when it comes to how you would apply these things. But this idea of focusing only a few concrete business outcomes is important. We know that the more things that we try to focus on, the less focus we really have, because all we're doing now is juggling the balls. And people will tell me, Ed, all I do all day is I juggle all these things, and I'm afraid to let anything drop. And that's a symptom of having too many priorities. And so the analogy I like to use if we're sticking with the juggling is, are all the things that you are juggling equal? And the answer is probably no. You've got certain things that take priority over others. And so what I like to say is, okay, some of the balls that you're juggling are rubber balls. And what happens if you drop a rubber ball? It comes right back up to you again. So if we drop one of those balls, not the end of the world. We've got a chance to fix it. But then we've got some glass balls. We let those drop, they smash, they crash and burn. Those are balls that if not kept in motion, the business is not going to hit its larger outcomes, right? And so when we think about our concrete business outcomes, we're talking about those glass balls. Can we just focus on a few of those things and get our people focused on just those few things? A couple years ago, I was working with a long-term care facility that was not hitting its goals. And the board brought me in to work with them, to work on their strategic plan and some of their business outcomes. And as a part of that, I got to know the CEO. And during an interview with him, I asked him how many different business metrics was he following and tracking. And he put up this chart of like 13 things. And it was a chart. Like, you can't see my hands, but it was this big chart on his wall. And I said, how are you doing this? Or why do you have so many business outcomes? He said, Ed, all of these things are important to the success of this facility. I said, okay, I get that. I looked at him and I understood. But what he wasn't seeing is that he was tracking them, right? Some of those things belonged out with different members of his C-suite, right? Some of them were very departmentally driven that the executive director should not be the one handling. And I said, this is why you're failing. You have too many things that you are measuring. And when we try to do too many things well, what happens? Anyone want to fill that in for me? Someone unmute and fill that in for me. What happens when we try to do too many things well? Oh, we got a shy bunch, Paul. Someone come out and play with me. Kristen, you're the first face up on there. You come out and play with me. If we try to do too many things well, what happens?
We got Sandra. She in the chat says you don't do anything well. And
Exactly. Kristen, you unmuted. Say it.
Yes, you end up doing too much all at once, and you can't be successful at every single thing you do.
Exactly. Exactly. So you guys know this, right? Inherently, we know this. But what happens? Someone asks us to do another task or another task. Next thing you know, we're measuring all of these things. Some are more important than others. We are talking about the important of the important tasks here. And so the final analogy I'll use here is, and maybe you all have heard this, right? So you got this empty jar and you've got a pile of rocks you need to put in. You got some pebbles you need to put in, some sand you put in, right? Well, if those all represent the different things that have to get in that jar, what happens if you put all the sand in first? It fills the jar up. Now you put the pebbles in. Now there's no room for the rocks, right? But if we do it in reverse, we put the rocks in, then the pebbles will filter through the rocks, the sand will filter down through everything, and we can pack it all in that jar. In that example, the rocks are your concrete business outcome, the things that absolutely have to get done. So as I transition back to Paul here for the second step, jot down a couple things that, whether it's for your department or for your organization, are the absolute critical definers of success for you.
So the next thing is you want to design a compelling experience. And that's where we're talking about directing where your culture is going. And now, if your organization has some roles that aren't that healing, or they're not, they're not things that are really attractive, a lot of cases people are like, well, like how do we make a role like that good? Or how do we really make a job that is really hard, grungy, dirty, bad hours into something that's has a great culture? Well, and the whole thing is about the experience, because the employee experience is all about what it's like to do that job with you in your organization. And a job is not a job. Like, just because it's got a description and it's a particular role, where you do it really impacts the experience of having that job, or of doing it. And so it's a matter of making sure that your people, while they're doing their job, are enjoying the experience of doing it, even when there's things that are uh, early, late at night, or when there are really stressful times, because what you've done is focus on how they experience doing the job. They actually do find the experience positive. And these are things that we want to ask our employees about. So designing a compelling experience involves having a great understanding of what your employees feel, and what they like, don't like, how well they feel listened to, how much they feel that you're caring for what they want and what their needs are. And so I've enjoyed doing this with companies, just because I'll talk to the frontline workers and people that are often they're just in the roles that aren't that sexy, and people just think, well, what can we do about that? So we'll find out really little gems about, well, we just really like that when we're here at this company, and I've worked in a lot of places, they give me, they just give me these little perks. And it could be something like flexibility, or maybe it is even just that there's like a coffee station that I have access to when I come in from the cold, or something that just shows that you care here. Because the people that sign up for these jobs know the jobs that they're getting into. Like people that have trained to be like healthcare workers, like they know that it's going to involve some messy work and some hard work, and they're signed up for it. So if we can make the experience of doing that good for them, it's going to factor into the culture. So deciding on the experience that you want to design for them is key. And that's what this actual step in designing your culture is. And back to you, Ed. I don't know if you have some stories about some of the people that you've worked with on that.
Well, I mean, I think the experience, and you hit on it, Paul, is so much of it's about what's my 9 to 5 like. You know, I'm going to have bad days. I'm going to have good days. But overall, do I want to go back to work? And Paul and I have talked about the employee experience in previous webinars. And I want you to differentiate the experience from employee engagement, right? Um, Engagement has this, and focusing on engagement is good, don't get me wrong, but it has more of that fun thing, like, oh, do we celebrate birthdays, and do we have football Fridays, and do we, have trick or treat and dress up, and those kind of things, right? But the experience is, what's it like working with my customers, my coworkers? What's my manager like? How do they treat me? All of those things contribute to my work experience, right? So it is so much more than just engagement. All right, let's take a look at step 3. So now we go from the experience into an emotional commitment with our organization. I'm so blessed to have clients that'll tell me, Ed, we've got people that have been here 20, 30, 40 years. That's a commitment level. When you hear that, that's companies that have that kind of retention are doing something right. Doesn't mean they're doing everything right, but they must be doing something right to maintain that level of time commitment. The question then that I ask is, well, are people emotionally committed to your organization? Why do they work for you versus your competitor, right? If you're in banking, there's lots of banks out there. Why do they choose to work with you? If you are in long-term care, why your facility instead of another one, right? That's what we have to know, because that's where the emotional commitment comes in. And I will hear things like, I can't imagine leaving my coworkers. That's an emotional commitment. I just love my boss. I couldn't imagine working for a better individual. When we hear those types of things, that's when I know that there's an emotional commitment there. These folks that are emotionally committed, and let's be honest with each other, you're never going to get full emotional commitment for your entire workforce. Okay. So let's just put that out there as a realistic expectation. What we need to strive for, though, is to have the environment that welcomes and fosters that emotional commitment. Whether someone chooses to commit to you, whole different story. Okay. But these folks, we're going to see later on in this session, these folks are going to be our influencers. The folks that have a passion for the organization, that have a passion for our customers, they have a passion for the widgets that we're selling. These are the folks that we'll be able to lean on to start to turn our culture around, or just put it in the direction it needs to go. These 10 steps can work either way. Can work for a bad culture, turning it around, can work for a culture that's just kind of veering off course a little bit and we have to correct. But we want to take that experience and use the employee experience to, again, have people say, I can't imagine working anywhere else. Is it perfect? No. Is everything the way I would want it to be? No. But overall, this is a great experience. And because of that, I'm willing to do the things that I need to do to help this organization be successful. When you hear those types of words coming from people's mouths, you know you have the emotional commitment needed. And you would be surprised at the number of people, or maybe not, that Paul and I get to talk to in focus groups and things, and the things they'll tell us about what they love about the organization that they're working for. They may not articulate to their boss or to HR or whatever, but they'll tell us for some reason. And they're heartwarming stories about why they would never leave that employer. Those are the people that we're going to build on. So what I'd like you to do now is thinking about your workforce, whether, again, depending on what your role is, who are some people that you would say are absolutely emotionally committed to the organization? And go ahead and jot those names down for yourself. And as you're thinking about these folks, I want you to think at all levels of the organization. Like, don't give me John Smith, the president. I hope that person's committed. Think about people at all levels of your organization and who stands out as being really emotionally committed to what's going on. While you're doing that, I'm turning it back to Paul.
To to carry that thought forward, like the people with the emotional commitment, you want to make sure that you understand what kind of roles they're in. And it's not necessarily whether they're high up in the org chart again, it's just how much influence do they have. And if the people with influence have a high emotional commitment, you're in a good place. But in a lot of cases, there are people that are not emotionally committed or the actual opposite of that, and they still have a lot of influence. And you can see them maybe on break or in the cafeteria, and they've got people around them listening to them, spouting all sorts of things. So these are what we call the highest impact roles in terms of culture, are the ones where when they are holding court, people are listening. So make sure that you know who has influence over your team and over the people that really form the culture. So if you notice that somebody has joined your team and they're relatively new, but all of a sudden you see people meeting for drinks and going out and doing things or getting together, that's somebody that has a lot of impact in their role. And these are people you want on board, you want on side. So get groups of people together, good or bad, and again, just ask them what they like about the company, what they don't like, and what they'd like to see changed, so that they feel heard and understood. Because in a lot of cases, what's going on is people are voicing what they think. They're just not telling it to you. And if that's causing discontent or undercurrents in your team, that's what starts shaping the culture. So these are people that are really important to get on side. And if you do it well and do it right, you can have a big influence and get them to help carry the culture, because a good culture is good for everyone. And when people know that you're working towards making a change and making a difference, a lot of the time they want to help. And we want to make sure that we know this, because if they don't want to help, that's something we're going to address further down in another one of the steps, right? When we said there's tough decisions that you've got to make. Well, if there's somebody in a high impact role that is making it hard to change things or going against initiatives that we take, we need to handle it. They need to get on side or get off the bus. So this is the key. So I want you to just think about that. If you look around your organization, who are the people that have impact on other team members? And you may have to ask some people, who's somebody that that you find really influential, like who's organizing things or getting people together outside of the organization. And sometimes it's just sitting there watching people watching and figuring this out. But people will know. So make sure that you're in the know. Pass
I
it
would
over
also
to you.
say that you can look at high impact roles as those roles that can impact your company mission the most. And do you have the people that are emotionally committed in those high impact roles? Or as you're looking at it, as Paul mentioned, do you have people in those high impact roles that are having the wrong impact? Right. So a lot of different ways to pursue this fourth step here. And one of the questions we've got coming in here says, sometimes I feel like everyone assumes that it's HR's job. You're right, Krista. Culture and the managing of it, I believe, is a C-suite job, not an HR job. And what I mean by that is it should never fall on one person, right? It's kind of leadership's role to do these things and to manage these things. Amen. Amen, Krista. uh, so yeah, we could spend a lot of time on this one, but this is one you want to star, because who's in those highest impact roles is critical to identify. Hopefully, you have some overlap with the step I just covered on the emotional commitment with these high impact roles. If so, you're in a really good spot. If not, then that's going to be one of the areas that we need to look at. Okay, so what then needs to happen is, so you think about this as building blocks. We've got a good employee experience. We've got some people that are emotionally committed. we've identified what our high impact roles are. Now we have to figure out, okay, well, what's happening currently that's keeping us from hitting those few concrete goals that we've set? It's almost like a bit of a performance analysis. What's our gap? And then we have to figure out what behaviors must change to close the gap. Do we have people that make a quality product but not fast enough? Okay, well, we want speed and quality. How do we do that, right? Oh, I got someone who works really fast for me, but they're always injured. Okay, well, that's a problem too. How do we get them to work speedily but also safely? You see what I'm saying, right? So what are the behaviors that we're seeing that are keeping us from hitting those concrete goals? What are the behaviors that are inhibiting us from having more emotional commitment driven? What behaviors are keeping us from a really good employee experience? So again, this is one of these steps where, depending on how you ask the question, you'll get some different answers, and we should ask it in different ways to get different answers. Because we might find that the behavior that needs to change has nothing to do with our frontline people. It could have everything to do with frontline management or executives or whatever, and how they're treating the people, or the environment they're creating. I remember being on a visit with a prospective client, and he wanted to take me out on his floor. And I said, great, let's go. And he's like, I love getting down the floor, talking to the people. And he's telling me all this on the way down. We get out on the floor, and I'm telling you, as soon as he set foot on this shop floor, every head went down. People were doing anything they could to not look at this guy. And so, we went through the tour. We got back to his office and said, okay, if you want me to help you, you've got to be straight with me. What's going on your floor? And he wasn't quite sure what I was getting at, but it was clear to me that one of two things was happening. Either one, he wasn't out on the floor a lot, and that's why people were looking away like, oh gosh, the big boss is here, I'll keep my head down. Or two, he is there a lot and he's doing all the wrong things. Either way, there was no sense of, hey, we're happy to see you, boss. Or, there was just none of that vibe going on. And so that became one of the things that we identified, that, hey, that behavior has to change, right? If you don't like being on the floor, okay, then we've got to talk about that. But when you're on the floor, here's how you need to conduct yourself as a leader. So this idea of changing behaviors can be the behaviors around hard skills, or it can be on the non-technical skill side. But what are the behaviors that are currently present that are keeping you from fulfilling your mission, taking care of your customers, and having the culture that you really want? All coming back at you.
All right. So the next one is, you want to promote citizen-led innovation. And this is, again, builds right on what Ed's talking about, is you want to ask your people what they feel is going to make things better. Because in all the cases, the people that are experiencing the problems have answers about the solutions to those problems. And they're often a lot better than what solutions that you're going to get from outside consultants or people that you bring in to identify the issues. And what people will tell you, if you ask in the right way, is a gold mine. They'll give you answers, and they'll give you angles on things that you never would have imagined, because they're right in the thick of it and they see things. And it brings us back to that story, Ed, of your wife on the floor at UPS, and what she came across, if you want to share that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So my wife's in sales for UPS, and she told me how she went out to one of her customers and they had totally changed the shipping area, the flow of the forklifts, just all of it. And that the warehouse manager had told her that they brought in some, industrial engineers, and time studied everything and whatever, changed it all around. And the one thing they didn't do was talk to the people about it. She was back in a couple months later. All that work was undone and the original traffic flow was restored. Why? Because it wasn't efficient. They never talked to the people about why they ran the routes that they did with the forklifts and how they were doing what they were doing. It's a valuable lesson. They spent tens of thousands of dollars with these industrial engineers, and it was wasted. And Paul, you and I have had, people say, well, do you really need to do a focus group? And we know what the problem is. And our answer is always absolutely. Because not that you're wrong, but we always hear stuff, don't we?
That and people like Ed said earlier, people will tell an outsider things that they don't tell to management or to their superiors, or they'll really express how they feel about things and the emotion behind it versus what they think a superior wants to hear or their boss. So that's why it's really nice to go in and actually get the sentiment and get these ideas because I go back to uh, the people that we're working with, and I tell them, well, here's what I'm finding, and here's what people are saying, and there's always like people are just like, really? That's what people say. That's what they think, because it's really a lot of the time foreign, and so many really great ideas come out of these interactions that we have, and it's a lot of fun to uncover this sort of stuff and put together solutions that can be really really simple and inexpensive in a lot of cases because your people do know best, and it makes them happy, it empowers them, and they will actually, if you put them in charge of developing these things, they take ownership and they really become proud of the changes that they can make, and that's what builds a great culture. So promoting citizen-led innovation is a powerful step for empowering your people and creating new people in leadership roles in positions of impact that gets your culture going in the right direction and starts to contain it, define it, and protect it. So that's a key area, is getting people to own aspects of the culture and make it theirs, make it something they're proud of.
And I
I'll
mean,
hand
it
it back
leads
to
to
you.
that. Yeah, I mean, it leads to that emotional commitment that we talked about, right? When someone knows that their ideas are being heard, that they can have a say in their own destiny, if you want to look at it that way. Um, what an emotional commitment. People will always work harder at their ideas than ours. So, provided that the idea that they're putting in place is going to work, it's not going to cost us extra money. Why wouldn't we do it? Right. So, all of these things are building, and that's why this is is really is almost a step-by-step journey. There's no way to kind of skip steps. You can do a couple maybe at the same time, but you see how we're building up to things now. And so with that in mind, this idea of transforming culture is an absolute journey. And I want to read this to you, and I neglected to write down where I heard this. So please credit to the author, but I'm just not sure where I heard this. But it says a trip is when you're trying to reach a destination. A journey is when you're trying to reach a goal. So when we think about that quote as it relates to committing to a comprehensive journey, it takes us right back to step one, where we were talking about we're focused on these couple of goals here. And what we're going to find as we're developing commitment and we're working on those high impact roles and people begin to open up and become part of the process, we're going to find that, let's say you wanted to turn around your safety culture, for instance. You're in a manufacturing environment, you want to turn around safety culture. And so you start focusing on that. But what's going to happen is you're going to find that there are things that are outside of, say, the realm of safety that are impacting safety. And when you veer off that road, you're like, oh, wow, there's stuff here that we can fix and change. And it's almost like tree branches, right? It keeps branching out. That's what I mean by a comprehensive journey. So we have to stay very focused, or we could get scattered pretty easily. And so my advice to folks when we're working on this is, okay, there are things we're going to uncover that we're just going to put in the parking lot for right now. We know it needs to be addressed, and as long as it's not a big safety concern, as long as it's not some easy cherry picking for some quick wins, we're going to leave it parked over here, okay? Because we want to stay focused on knocking the few things out, and then we can come back around and get that. Otherwise, we're going to find we're going in way too many different directions. And what's going to happen? Too many balls in the air, they start to drop, nothing gets done. Okay. And so focusing on, as we're recognizing that this is a journey and committing to the fact that, yeah, we're going to uncover things that are going to need addressed that maybe are outside the realm of what we thought we wanted to work on, but we're committed to that. That's what, from an executive management standpoint, our people want to see. That, hey, we're committed to changing the things in the organization that need to change to keep this journey moving forward. And, as you know, all of you well know, because all of you are seasoned business folks here, everything is so intertwined in how our organizations operate. And it's really hard to kind of peel it back and just say, okay, well, if I just work on this here, it's not going to impact anything else. Well, that's never completely accurate. When it comes to working on our culture, we almost have to try and do that and stay focused right here. And in some cases, it's not just about putting something in a parking lot. It might be, it's a little fire burning, and we have to say, you know what? I'm going to let that fire burn right now because I'm going to put a bigger fire out. Paul, anything you want to say? I'm going to kick it back to you here on this one.
Transformation is not something that happens overnight. I mean, we engage in initiatives and get things kicked off, but there's a lot of things that crop up, and you uncover things in layers, as Ed said, and the focus is really key. Like going back to number one, where you just want to choose a couple of key business objectives, and if you stay focused on just a couple, you'll make leaps and bounds in a year. I mean, people underestimate what they can do in 1 year, and they grossly overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can accomplish in like 3 years. So
exactly. Yeah.
It's a matter of looking at the long game. And then we'll take it into engaging with the cultural influencers. I think we kind of covered this really early on when we were talking about the highest impact roles, and the cultural influencers. I mean, some of these people overlap, right? And we can create cultural influencers too from some of the steps that we've been talking about. And when you're promoting citizen-led advocacy, and you get people that start to really develop pride in what they're doing and in their role, they can get people on board and start to influence the culture. And that's like, at this point, we're creating this wheel that starts spinning and gaining momentum. And as you start to shift the direction of the culture in the company, and people start seeing that they have influence and they have power, it's empowerment, and it's something contagious. And that's why, I mean, at first, motivation is like, people think, oh, we need motivation and inspiration and like things to lift our culture up, and we just want to get people engaged. We want to get them excited, and so we have events, pizza picnics, and beer carts on Fridays or whatever to get people happy. Those things get people engaged. But when you want to get people really committed and involved, that's the harder work, right? It's not just about having fun. It's about being committed to a process, wanting to take ownership, and feeling like them having control over how the outcome of something has meaning and importance. And as people start to feel that their role has an impact and that they're valued and that there's meaning to what they do, they start to care about the people around them, and they influence the culture. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle. It's just that if it's left to its own devices, it will self-perpetuate in often the wrong direction. So with a little direction and care, and when you start to contain this amoeba, as we talk about it, you start to create the cultural influencers that you want to have. I don't know what you might have as examples of this.
You mentioned earlier, Paul, you gave a great example on this one, where you walk into the break room and you got this one person holding court. They're talking, everyone else is listening. It's a great example of a cultural influencer. And what you have to be careful of is, a cultural influencer doesn't mean that they're doing good cultural influencing, right? You've got people out there that are cultural influencers for all the wrong reasons. And one of the best examples I learned, several of you in here know me fairly well and know that I started my career at UPS. And one of my first professional jobs at UPS was as a delivery supervisor. So that's training drivers and dispatching them and things. And so it came time for me to go out on a safety ride with a driver who was just a staunch union guy, did not like management, was just rude to managers. I mean, it was just a very adversarial relationship. So I'm not looking at all forward to this day. Get on the truck with him, and we're only five. Well, like the industrial park he was responsible for was the same industrial park that the UPS facility was in. So we only had like a 3-minute ride to the first stop. He gets off the truck, starts carrying the boxes in. He lights up. Hey, Joe, how you doing? Hey, they're talking and laughing. I'm like, I've never seen this guy before. Who is this guy, right? Back in the truck, we go to the next door. The same thing happens. So after about an hour of this, I stopped him. I said, okay, look, who are you right now? He says, what do you mean? Like, your customers love you. He says, yeah, and I love them too. Okay, so why don't I see this person in the facility? He says, because I hate management. I said, okay, what I ever do to you? Nothing, but you wear a tie, so you're management. Now, here's the thing with that. Now, I broke through with him, and I'll finish the story in a moment, but he's a cultural influencer. He's hanging out there having coffee in the morning, and guys are listening to him. He's hanging out at the local deli in the evening, and guys would go there and hang out. And they'd listen to him, right? So here's this staunch union guy, and I hate management. People are listening to him. And so I decided, you know what? I never did anything to this guy. I can't make him like me, but I can make him realize I'm not, quote, like management. Now, this was a 20-some-year employee. What I got out of him by the end of the day was that the reason he hated management so much was that 10 years prior, 10, he had torn several of his uniform shirts, had asked management to order him new shirts because that UPS buys that stuff for the people, and it didn't happen. And he said, I didn't like the fact that I had to go out looking less than professional in front of my customers because management failed to order me a shirt. Now, to some of us, that may seem silly, but when you really think about it, he was proud of the company he worked for. He enjoyed his job. I mean, there's someone who had emotional commitment to the company, just not to management. So I made an attempt to try and build a relationship with this guy. And I got him to the point, I don't know whether he ever liked me or not, but we could have conversations. And I took that as a win. Gave myself the pat on the back, said, okay, we're good here. But these are the cultural things we have to watch out for, because some of the people that you may dislike the most could carry the most weight with some groups of employees. So that brings us to the unwilling folks. What do you do with the folks who will not go where you want to go? So we all know the example of we got to get the right people on the right seats in the bus that's going in the right direction. We've heard that before, okay? But if you get that in your mind, what we're talking about here is people that won't get on the bus with you. What do you do with them? Now, when I talk about this live, people start using, leave the station, leave them behind. Okay, great. I agree. Leave them behind. But we know what that means in this day and age. Would someone please tell me, go ahead and unmute. I'm not picking on Kristen this time just because she's the first smiling face on my screen. What in this day and age do we have to be worried about when it comes to just leaving the station without these people? Something that I know you're all dealing with and you've been dealing with for several years. Krista says diversity, equity, inclusion. Maybe. If I leave the bus, or if I leave Paul, he doesn't want to get on my bus. and I leave the station without him, I have to replace him, right? I mean, what we're talking about when we're talking about leaving the station without someone is we're exiting them from the organization. And I know all of you right now have open positions. I'd be surprised if you don't. And so this becomes an extremely difficult decision to make. How do I jettison someone when I'm not sure I can replace them? Because isn't the devil you know better than the devil you don't know? Isn't having a warm body in a seat better than no body in a seat? You can use whatever analogy you want. But that's a hard question. And Paul and I can't answer that for you, right? I happen to personally believe that no one in the seat is better than the wrong body in the seat, because I've seen what damage can be done by people who are in the wrong seat, on the wrong bus, going the wrong way. And when we talk about the unwilling, we're not talking about people that you think you can turn around. We're talking about people that you have attempted to turn around in the past and just won't. But it gets worse. So you've got that person standing there at the station that refuses to get on the bus. It's easy to pull that bus away at that point. What happens if one of your people is standing in front of the bus and will not let it leave the station? I don't advocate violence, so don't be saying, run him over. Okay, figuratively, we can say run him over. But when it comes down to it, we have a very big decision to make. This is someone who has to be gotten out of the way and quickly, because they're worse than the person who won't get on the bus. At least that person's hanging out along the sidelines and we can pull off without them. If you have that person standing in front of the bus, there I draw the line and say, if you're going to make any further progress, this person has to go. Not to another position, not to another department. They've just got to go, because they are inhibiting our progress to get to where we want to get to. And I can't believe, and some of you know this, 99% of the time, when that person is removed from the workforce, what happens? Everyone else goes, what took you so long? We wanted this person gone. They were miserable. They brought us all down. Then you start hearing all the stories. So that's where we really do have to think about whether that empty seat is in fact better. But, again, I can't make that decision for our clients. It's something that we have to talk through. But we have had situations where this list comes up of, okay, these people are unwilling. No matter what we do, they're not getting on the bus. What are we doing about it? And what's the plan? Maybe it's not some mass exodus. Maybe it's, Paul's gone first, another couple months, Kristen's gone, another couple months, right? I mean, there may need to be a plan to exiting these folks from the organization, but we do have to have a plan.
Yeah, Pam
People are not
says,
the most important asset. The right people are. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. We always hear about people are the asset, but it is. In fact, it's the right people. Thank you for mentioning that. I think it's Pam mentioned that. So by all means, it's the right people are the best asset. The wrong people, they go in the other column. They're a liability. Go ahead, Paul.
yeah, so this is a journey. So it's not something that's going to take place in a few months. It's something that you are going to see changes over the year. And you want to make sure you're seeing the right changes, and you want to make sure things are going in the right direction. And that's why tracking results is so important. And I mean, how do you measure something like culture? Something that can change shape, and depending on the container it's in. And how do you make sure that it's moving in the right direction? Well, there's a bunch of different ways we can measure that, and it's not going to be the same for each organization. The things that you track are going to be based on what you need to change, any problems that you identify, or the goals that you're looking to meet. But metrics are the way to keep track. And some of them, again, they're not things that you can measure scientifically or in an exact way. It's going to be based on gut feel and taking the temperature of different aspects of your organization. So in a lot of cases, again, it's asking questions and seeing what kind of answers you're getting from people, and then giving them a rating, giving a score on how you feel about that person and how they answered. And we actually have our next webinar planned around the metrics that we really like for taking the temperature of the organization and seeing how you're doing, not just in culture, but also in recruiting and in marketing your open roles. But our focus on the culture here is we're doing it because culture is such an important part of your brand, of the brand that you present to the people you're trying to attract, and also the people in the organization that you're retaining. And this is my expertise is in just capturing that story. Like, what is it that you are using to define this culture? How do you talk about it? What are the words that are used? And then once you have that story, how do you present it in such a way that people go, wow, I want to be a part of that. I want to I want to add to it. I want to help grow it, develop it, and keep it strong. And so when we have measurements like this, it's the social proof that we're doing this good and we're doing this much better over last year. And these are the things that we're proud of, the measurements that we use to make sure that we're staying at the level that we want to stay at, and that we're striving to reach even higher levels. And how can we get more people on board? So it's not a science. It's but it is something that needs numbers and needs some figures to guide it. So this is something that we've been working at in getting our people on board with. So I think what the we do have something where you can measure, take a stock or an inventory of your culture today, and it's going to be something you can get at the end of this webinar after you give us a little bit of feedback. Well, I'll pass it to you, Ed, for going into that.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up the 10 steps, people will often ask us, well, how long does this take? I don't know, right? It depends on where you're going. How long is it going to take you to drive across the country? I don't know. I mean, Google Maps says one thing, but if you want to take every detour to see the largest ball of twine, it's going to take you longer. If you want to break the speed limit, it's going to take you shorter, right? So, because this is a journey, it's kind of hard to say, gosh, how long is it going to take? Because it really depends on what your outcomes are. And are you going after like easy hit things? Okay, well, then we should see that pretty quickly. Longer term things, gonna take longer, right? Only you know when you've reached the end of your journey. And by definition, I'm not sure we ever reach the end of a journey, because that involves a bit of a destination. We already said that's a trip, right? So is it when you hit your goals? Okay, great. But what do you do when you hit goals? Next year, you stretch them out a little bit more. So this can become a very much a snowball rolling downhill kind of scenario, that as you hit the little goals, the bigger goals get bigger, and so on. And what we're talking about here with just the course correction, we're not talking about a major pivot. We're not saying, oh, we're not hitting our goal, let's go over here somewhere else. No, we're talking about, okay, well, why not? Let's just tweak it a little bit if we have to. Stay the course, right? So we're talking about going around over a hurdle, around a detour kind of thing. So Paul mentioned that we've got something for you, and we do. I have for you an assessment of your readiness for culture transformation. You can get it for free. All you got to do is give us a little bit of feedback. So some of you have been in our webinars before. You know how this works. You may get your phones out, please. Scan that QR code. It's going to take you to a place to put your email in there, so we know where to send the culture sheet. You will not get put on my email list unless you say, yeah, include me on your email list. I don't play that game. But what this does for us is it not only gives us a little bit of feedback on how we're doing and are we fulfilling your needs because it is your time, but we like to give some stuff away. And this is the way to make that happen. So please take a moment to do that for us. And while you are doing that, I think, Paul, you brought up a really neat point, and that's that, when we look at prepping for next month's webinar, and it's all about, I think we're going to cover like 10 metrics or so. that you can use to measure different pieces of what's going on with your employee experience in your culture. It's a fun one. I like to play with numbers. I like what they tell us. I think we've got some in there that probably you've heard before, but we're going to put them in hopefully a new light for you, and some new ones I think that maybe you've not heard before, that you can play around with. So please do join us for that one. And one other final exciting announcement. If you are not connected with us on LinkedIn, please reach out and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're going to be doing some exciting things through LinkedIn Live starting in the new year. And so those will be things that I want to keep you up to date on. So if we are not connected on that social media platform, please reach out and connect with us so you can stay up to date on those things. Does anyone still need the QR code up? If not, I'm going to go ahead and move along. We all good? If you're not good, now's the time to speak. All right, moving on. So we are right at the top of the hour. I trust that this has met your needs from a cultural perspective. We've given you a roadmap, right? How you get from point A to point B is up to you. This is not a direct route. It's not a direct flight. There's going to be some stops, some layovers, some diversions. But if you follow those 10 steps, I guarantee you, you will hit your goals. It's almost impossible to not hit your goals when you have a well-trained, emotionally committed workforce who is fired up about working for your organization and working with your end users, your customers, your clients, whatever you happen to call them. And so we thank you for joining us today. Please do reach out if you have any questions about what we covered today. Happy to take them offline and meet with you one-on-one to chat about that. And you can find my calendar right there on my website at edcrow.com. So until next month, for Paul, I'm Ed Crow. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.